at the commission. All commissioners, with the exception of Commissioner Irvin, are present in the hearing room. Commissioner Irvin is tuning in from his office as we maintain our social distancing protocol. Is the applicant ready to call his first witness? Call the next witness.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. At the close of the proceeding yesterday, if you recall, we had a question about the introduction of the 6 graphs from Mr. Hanslick. And Mr. Hanslick, if you would go ahead and turn on your video at this point. And so Mr. Hanslick remains on the stand. We did send to all of the parties yesterday after the hearing concluded those 6 graphs, so they should have had them to review last evening. And Mr. Burns had raised an objection. He wanted to be able to review, of course, the exhibits. And so Mr. Hanslick's present. Our offer to tender those still exhibits is still pending before the commission, and subject to the commission's ruling on the objections.
All right, Attorney Burns.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Willoughby, for circulating those yesterday afternoon. I think we would only ask that in light of these graphs being produced late in the day yesterday, that our witnesses be allowed to comment on them as part of their testimony. And if that accommodation could be made, then we would withdraw our objection.
Okay. Any other parties would like to comment on the graphs? So here's my concern. Obviously, the graphs were not pre-filed, which could add and probably has added time to this proceeding. At the same time, I think the commission is always interested, when appropriate, in the most recent information. I really don't like going against our pre-file rule. But to ensure that the commission has the best information available, and considering that if we offer the opportunity for Attorney Burns' client to allow their witnesses to respond or review the graphs, if that solves the problem, then I'm fine with allowing those 6 graphs to be entered into evidence. So, Attorney Willoughby, would you identify those 6 graphs again?
Yes, I'm going to ask Mr. Hanslick to make sure that I'm correct, and I do want the record to reflect, Mr. Chairman, that these are 6 days that have occurred since our rebuttal testimony was filed. So obviously they could not have been connected. But since one of the issues in this case is the intermittency of solar and the unpredictable nature of drops in solar generation, and our ability and our responsibility to maintain reserves to ensure that when solar drops, we do not have any loss of power generation to our customers. So this is 6 days, and Mr. Hanslick, would you state for the record what those 6 days are?
Those days, series begins on August 12th. It includes the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th and 17th of August.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, we would move that introduction, and you've indicated that you will accept them. And what we will do is provide them in a form for the court reporter to attach to the record, and we would move their introduction. I believe it would be the first hearing exhibit.
You're correct, Attorney Willoughby. Mr. Hanslick, the graphs they start on August 13th and end on August 17th. Did I hear that? Or is it August
Start
12th?
on August 12th.
12th, okay.
12th, that's correct.
And the graphs depict what information, sir?
This is the actual output of the solar generation on our system during the period of this, from sunrise to sunset.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, if it would be of help, he could very quickly share his screen and show those 6 graphs. It will take 2 minutes.
Okay. Hanslick Exhibit 1 will be marked and entered into the record as a composite exhibit as hearing exhibit number 1. And just so the record is clear, that exhibit includes graphs for solar output from August 12th through August 17th.
Right. And are you interested, Mr. Chairman, in him briefly showing the commission those 6 graphs?
Yes, sir.
Please do so at this time, Mr. Hansel.
See if I can share my screen as well as you did yesterday, Mr. Willoughby.
I hope you can do better than I did, Mr. Hansel. But I'm recovering from that mistake.
That's the. Okay. Is
Perfect. I can
that
see
graph being displayed?
it is being displayed. Is it large enough, Mr. Chairman?
No, sir.
Let's see. How about there?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
So this is the first day, August 12th, like I said, from sunrise to sunset. And this particular day is actually one of the better days where solar came in and reached its maximum output. But then it did drop. The maximum output was 776 megawatts. Minimum was 540. But then as we went back into the peak, towards the peak of the day, solar returned, but then started to fade again. So the drop from maximum down to this point is about 30%. And like I said, this is one of the better days. And if there aren't any questions, I'll just go on to the next graph.
Correct. Just briefly review through them, and then
Okay.
if anyone has questions, they will be given time to ask them.
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chair Belzer.
could I just ask that he describe the scale of what we're looking at on the y-axis and the x-axis, please?
Yeah, that's a good point. I should have done that in the intro here. So this is August 13th, and on the y-axis is a megawatt scale of solar output. So, in this particular case, we're approaching 800 megawatts. I think on this day we peaked at 779. On this bottom scale here is time, and I apologize the way this system spits out this data. It doesn't allow us to really put the time scales in hourly increments. But if we need to look at a particular point, I can go to it and give you the exact time of when that occurred. So like in this case, this is the low point of 406. The high point was 779, which from here to here, minimum or maximum to minimum is a 48% drop. And again, it returned towards the end of the day. Just as a note, this 779 peak, we actually forecasted our peak for that day to be 792. So that was pretty close. And then across the peak, we forecasted actual was 645. Our forecast was slightly lower than that. I think it was around 600. So again, this graph is not too terribly bad, but the drop is a 48% drop, and that's greater than what we actually anticipate in our when we forecast our reserves for solar. I'll move on to the next chart. If there's any questions, just stop me.
Sir, and if you could expand that next chart larger than the previous
Okay.
chart. Yes, sir.
Let's see here. That might be a little too big. It's off my scale. I'm not sure what you're saying. Is that okay?
That's better.
Okay. So this is August 14th. So on this particular day, we saw solar ramped up, and from the beginning of the day, we're seeing slight fluctuations, but it was a challenge just to balance. These are only 75 to 150 megawatt swings, but all during this time, our generation, our lower cost generation, is following this inconsistency in the solar output. And then as we approached the afternoon, the output dropped, and this is at 3:30. We are at 495 megawatts. Here we get down to 428 or 467, and on down to where we get to about 424 megawatts here. That's a 43% drop in the output. Again, the actual forecast indicated a peak of 727, and the peak for this day was 749. So forecast during this period was fairly accurate. It was when the decline started that we had to start dipping into our reserves and make up for this loss of solar output. All right. So this one is a little more drastic, I believe. Mr. Chairman, how does that look on your screen?
Good, sir.
Okay, good. This one is a little more drastic in both the sags and then, of course, the spikes. It is coming back. So we hit a peak of, I think this one was 696. That's correct. 696 megawatts was the peak. We saw a dip occur here down to 430. And then it dropped on down. I think this was the lowest output prior to just a normal sun setting. And the drop from this peak to this point right here is a 76% drop. And this is not only exceeds what we set aside for reserves for the solar portion of our generation. I think it also exceeds what Mr. David provided in his testimony as far as needing reserves greater than 40% that we already provide. You go a little bit bigger with this one. And here's another one where, again, it ramped up close, but there's still some spikes and surges as its solar is ramping in. We're seeing 250 to or 100 to 150. This is a much lower output. This is only 450 megawatts of solar on the system on this particular day. This is the 16th, and we actually forecasted At the peak, this was 455 megawatts actual. Our forecast was 448. So we did a pretty good job on the day ahead. But what, of course, we can't forecast is what happened in the middle of the day when we have a drop from 450 to roughly 270, and then back up and back down. And then before we even get close to our peak, we started to see a decline much sooner than we typically would see just from the sun starting to set. So on this day, we went from a peak of 455 down to about 110 right here. And that's a 75% drop. Again, that's greater than the 40% that we plan on, and also greater than I think what Mr. David has in his testimony, his studies that he's done. And then the last day.
And what day is that, sir? Could you identify the date?
That was August 16th. That would have been Monday of this week. Again, even for that Monday, there were storms rolling through, I believe, which was one of the reasons why our forecast was 448 as opposed to where we normally see in the 700s and up even in the low 800s. So we had planned for a lower solar output on that day, but again, it's what happened throughout the day that that's what we had to regulate to, and that's where we had to pull from reserves. And like I said, that was a 75% drop from peak from the peak solar output to where it finally settled out towards the end prior to our system peak. This is another day. This one, solar, as some of those graphs indicated, it would have been much steeper coming in, but this is much more gradual increase in the solar output. And this was actually Tuesday of this week, the 17th. I'll call these minor fluctuations. We had a pretty good ramp up here, but what really causes the problems with this graph is, again, from the peak of 625 megawatts here, and the decline to where at this point right here, this is still it's 350 in the afternoon. So we normally rely on a much higher output of solar compared to what we see in the afternoon. But this drop from the peak down to this point here was an 82% drop. That's significant. That's twice as much as what we forecast or what we plan on when we do we set aside the reserves for solar. And again, this is much greater than what Mr. David, I believe, has in his testimony he's referred to. So that's a quick summary of these graphs, and I'll take any questions y'all might have.
Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. Mr. Hanslet, this has been fascinating. I was looking a little bit to the left of your chart and wondered if it conveyed that this is truly minute-to-minute real-time data that's coming into the system. And you might want to show that because it's
yes.
It's intriguing.
It's so this is taken, and again, I'm not an expert at pulling these charts together, but I've got someone who works for me that does a great job with this. As you can see, I can't even migrate around my screen right now to get the chart back. But anyway, this is minute-to-minute data. We store in it's a historian that we have that stores previous data from our energy management system, which is what we use to operate transmission system. And so this is pulled out of that historian that we use.
So is it actual data based on the minutes that are indicated to the left of the chart?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And it was interesting.
Now, these minutes over here to the left are that's kind of the data piece. You have to use this time scale at the bottom to see where we are throughout the day.
Okay.
That's just that the table on the left is just where the data is being pulled into the graph.
Correct me if I'm wrong about this, but it's clear that you predict the peaks for the day and do that really well. I think I heard you testify that you aren't able to predict the dips that happen within the day, but I feel like yesterday we heard testimony about the weather, and is that just an overall peak and the timing of the peak, or does the weather also give you some estimate of what the dips may be?
Yeah, the weather's the primary driver in both our load forecast and in our solar forecast. And I'll give you an example. We knew that this was a day where we forecasted this day with a lower peak output, and we also forecasted a lower output towards the end of the day. We actually had a forecast at the end of the day of 276 across. Well, let me take that back. It was 309 across our peak hour, and so we knew the weather was such that we would have a close to peak solar output towards the beginning of the day or midday, but that we knew it would fall off. But what we don't know is we don't know is what happens here with these dips, and then it comes back, and then this big drop right here was not something we forecasted, and to see a drop like that, 250 megawatts in one slug, it weather, or it could be a solar facility that took some panels off for some reason, but that's a big drop in a short period of time.
Would you talk a little bit about the regionalness of, I understand this data is collective for the desk system. Does it matter at all what's happening in kind of micro regions from a solar perspective?
Yeah, it does. We seem to have, I'll say, I don't know a better word, say pods of solar facilities.
What was that word?
Just a pod. It's a group. I just made that up. That's not something that we normally use to describe them, but just a group of solar facilities in a certain area. Now, of course, they're all out in the country, in what used to be farmland, and so we have some in like the Barnwell, Bamberg, Blackville area. We have some in and around Orangeburg, St. Matthews, and then down in the lower part of the state in the Jasper County, Hampton County, areas. So, if the storms are isolated, it'll just pick that one geographic area at a time. And as they move through, you might have a storm hitting one area, and then as that moves through, those facilities may produce power again as the clouds pass. One thing that these same storms could affect our load, but they never coincide because like I said, the solar facilities are out in what used to be farmland. Our load pockets are Columbia, Charleston, Somerville areas, and so solar may have been impacted by a thunderstorm or by a storm, and it may be 2 or 3 or 4 hours later before we see our load drop off as it hits a load pocket. So it'd be great if they can just work together, but that's we can't really control that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanslet. No further questions.
Thank you.
Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Hanslick. I enjoyed your presentation yesterday and hearing about the pump storage facility and being able to utilize that at sometimes when you have extra solar coming on board. And but this is kind of showing, I guess, the other side of the equation when you don't have enough solar coming on board, that you had expected. So I would assume when those dips occur that the pump storage facility probably can't ramp up and down quick enough. So it's not like, okay, we're putting solar extra in here one day and then the next day we're taking solar back out, just so to speak. It's not like you can match it up. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I'll give you let me give you a little bit of background about how we operate the pump storage facility, because it is critical. It is a critical resource in balancing our system with this type of a variable resource out there. And we use it as much as we can to try to balance, and with the thought that we have to run some of that water out, so that when we do have these minimum periods, we use those pumps to carry us through, like we did, on that example I used yesterday on January 28th. But even on a daily basis, that economic resource commitment group not only looks at how they dispatch it from a generation or pumping standpoint, but they also have to look at it, because it's a limited resource with the amount of water that we have. They need to make sure we have enough water for the next peak, and we need to make sure that we have enough room for the next valley. And so a lot of times it's not the primary resource that we use to balance solar from an intermittent standpoint. To actually balance our system because of the intermittent nature or output of what we're seeing here, that's where we have to use those quick response, mostly combined cycle units, to follow this type of load. When we do that, that's when we actually ramp those units down and keep them, I'll call it with headroom, that they can ramp up for when these dips occur. So in order to do that, we bring on our more expensive, slower steam units and run them at a higher output to allow these combined cycles to have room to move up and down to follow this intermittent output. Okay.
Thank you. That was going to be the second part of my question, so you got that covered too. So I guess, make a long story short, you're one of those key people in the picture, in the puzzle for the, what's the number? Is it 8760, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day? It doesn't matter what the weather is or what's going on. You're right there in the loop trying to keep the power on for everybody.
Well, actually, I've got 12 system operators on shift that are the key personnel to doing this. They're well trained and dedicated, and they work night shifts, they work weekends, they work holidays. They've got rotating shifts, and they're doing a fantastic job with the challenge they have ahead of them with solar.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. That's all I have.
Commissioner Caston.
Morning, Mr. Hensley.
Good morning.
I guess to build on Commissioner Williams' question, and I'm trying to understand the effect of reserve capacity on the service area regions, those pods you mentioned. How do these isolated storms or such as that in these pods or these regions, how does that affect reserve capacity needs?
We don't monitor the output of each region of solar. So what we do, it's an accumulated number that we get from our total solar output. So when we put our reserve numbers together, Mr. Bell's group, our economic resource commitment group, since they're trying to plan the resources for the next day, we look at all the generation we have available, and then we look at, and including solar. And when we add all those numbers up, and we come up with, let's say we have 4,500 megawatts of generation available. And then we look at our load forecast for the peak hour, and it's 4,000. So that would tell us we have 500 megawatts in reserve. But what we do with that the total solar output in our forecast, we only take 60% of that and apply it to our reserves. And because, as you can see, that's we're fairly comfortable most of the time. Most of the time by only by using that 60% number when we do our calculations. But as you know, some of these charts show that there are times when that number is greater, and we're actually having to use reserves that we would normally have set aside for a loss of a generating unit, or for errors in forecast, or instantaneous load in between those hourly peaks that we forecast for. So, we don't like to kind of get back to your question. We don't monitor each individual set, but we do know that we keep the weather screen up, and we can monitor storms moving across the system. We kind of get an idea that we've got this storm coming through, and it's headed towards Hampton County and Jasper County. And so we expect that we're going to lose some solar during that period of time. So what the system operator would do is just make sure he's got enough of his generating units available to ramp up. So on his screen, what he sees, we have a screen that's called available. Let's see. I guess it's really available operating reserve. It's what we have at that moment in time. And what it looks at is all the generation that we have available that's not being used. So that's really what we have in reserve, is a generation that's not being used. All of the other generation is being used to balance load, assuming everything's balanced. So that number that he has available includes our generation. We're saying all the solar's already in. We know what that is. We're not going to get any more out of it. It's doing what it does. But then we subtract our available reserve number by 40% of the solar generation online, and that provides us a more realistic reserve number, knowing that we've taken out the portion of solar that what I'll call is non-firm, and as history shows and operating experience shows, that tends to be the part that we need to remove and make sure our reserves are accurate, and accounts for this variability in solar by decrementing our reserves by that 40%. And that was a long answer. I hope I answered it, but if not, just let me know.
That was a long answer, but I think I followed the bulk of it. Okay, so to make sure I understand, as Commissioner Williams asked, the forecast is primarily to come up with as a good a number as possible or practical for the peak, how much solar you anticipate you'll have, and the drops may be estimated just looking at real-time storms passing through. Is that correct? Is that what I heard?
That's correct. I'll maybe add a little bit that might help any misunderstandings that may have, but I think you got it. So the peak hour of the day in the summertime is typically the 5 o'clock hour, and so we plan around that peak. We have a load forecast that tells us what that peak is forecasted to be, and we plan our generation around that. And again, we include solar into that number. And the and as we adjust throughout the day, when we see a dip in solar, sometimes, as you can see on these charts that I've shown, sometimes it comes back up to where it was. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it dips further. So as we start seeing these dips throughout the day, what we don't know is it going to come back for the peak? And well, in the chart we have right here on this screen, you see that big dip, and that's around 3:30 in the afternoon. That's heading into our peak hour. And you know, the first couple charts I showed, we actually did have solar come. It dropped throughout the day, but it actually did, increase a little bit towards the end of the day and was back during the peak hour and close to what we forecasted. But in a case like this, you see a lot of drops and spikes, and and finally towards the end of the day, that last drop just never came back, and that was going into the peak hour.
So if I'm understanding, the real complexity comes if it were a constant slope or a slope up, and then a plateau, a constant plateau, or a more uniform curve across the top, and then the constant slope downward. Much easier planning. You could plan the generation type, but with for example, the one I'm looking at now looks like a reverse V. The complexity is the variation in the margin of variation in short time spans, and then having to balance that with available generation supplies that some are dispatchable and you can, I assume, use quickly. Some take a little more time. Some are less expensive to use than others. Is that a fair understanding of what all I've been hearing?
Yes, I think that's a pretty good summary of what you've been hearing. You hit on the uncertainty and the reserves and some of the cost of the generation and the ramping ability of the generation that we have. So it's all kind of works its way in there to maintaining system reliability and maintaining that load generation balancing with the load on our system.
Well, Mr. Henslick, I do not want your job. Glad you have it. Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for this witness?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do have some cross on these exhibits. I haven't had an opportunity to do that yet, and I'll make it quick.
All right, go right ahead. Don't feel the need to rush.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Henslick, I appreciate your time this morning and going through these things. I just wanted to clarify a few things about the graphs that you've discussed this morning.
Attorney Burns, do you
yes.
need the graphs up, or can Mr. Henslick?
Mr. Henslick can take it down. I'm going to refer him to one, but I've already got it called up, and I can share that screen. So he can take it down off of his screen.
All right, Mr. Henslick, if you would stop sharing your screen.
Okay, let me figure out how to do that. I just lost my...
While he's doing that, Mr. Chairman, I have a preliminary matter to help the court reporter. Yesterday, I gave a website that has these weather forecasts on it. And I wondered if the court reporter might correct the website, because I said it was www.wpc.nccp. It's actually .ncep. I couldn't read my own handwriting. The rest of what I said yesterday is correct.
Yeah, I can't seem to get this back up. Are you still seeing my screen?
It appears we are. I think if you go to the top of your screen that you're sharing, a little orange box should drop down and you can hit stop sharing.
Okay, I see it.
At least it's orange on my computer. I don't know if it is on yours.
Yeah. I don't see this. Oh, there it is.
There you go.
There we go. Thanks for the help.
Yeah. Learned the hard way. That's for sure.
I was getting ready to call Mr. Willoughby.
Thank you, Mr. Hansley. Let me ask you a couple of questions.
And I would have been right there, Mr. Hansley, to provide that IT support.
I'm not sure we have that kind of time, Mr. Willoughby. Anyway, I'm just playing around. Let's talk just in general about the graphs that you discussed this morning, Mr. Hansley. They don't show the Dominion forecast for hourly solar production on the days represented, do they?
No, that's I mean, these were graphs we put together just in the mornings before I came in for prep. So
right.
I do have the forecast numbers as far as what we forecast for the max and what we had across some of those minimum periods. But
so you do forecast minimum periods as well?
Every hour we forecast solar.
Okay.
And
the graphs that you've presented, because you prepared them sort of, as you said, late in the day, they don't show the difference between what Dominion forecast for hourly solar production as compared to what solar actually produced on those days, do they?
No, but I can give you some of the numbers as far as the peak hours.
My question, though, is whether the graphs that you've presented show that information.
They do not.
Okay. Are you aware that the Guidehouse study developed the VIC based on costs related to unexpected drops, solar forecast error? In other words, the unexpected drops in solar production rather than the forecast drops in solar production?
I think you mentioned that yesterday.
Okay. But other than that, you're not aware of the Guidehouse methodology?
No.
Okay. Let me share my screen and direct you to one particular graph that you presented to us. This should be August 16th. Do you see that on your screen?
Yes.
Let me enlarge it a bit. Mr. Chairman, is that good for you as well?
If you could enlarge it a bit more, it would help us here in the hearing room.
How's that?
If you could go a little bit larger, please, sir.
I think that's about as big as I can get it without it going off the screen.
Okay.
It looks like the maximum solar production for August 16th is just over 450 megawatts, right?
That's correct.
And if Dominion were forecasting 450 megawatts of solar production for August 16th, you wouldn't carry the same operating reserves for that day as compared to a day where you forecast 800 megawatts of solar production, would you?
Right. That's correct. It's done on a percentage basis.
All right. And the time frame that you've shown us here, August 12th through August 17th, that's approximately the same time frame as Tropical Storm Fred was making his way through the southeast, wasn't it?
That's correct.
And some of these days, in fact, South Carolina experienced some quite heavy rain and downpours from Tropical Storm Fred.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I've got the forecast for this day. If you're interested, that 455 megawatt peak, we were forecasting 448 megawatts.
So you were pretty dead on that one.
So what we did, and I think I mentioned this when I presented one of these graphs, was we were aware that day was going to be an overcast, cloudy, rainy day. So we did not forecast 850 megawatts of solar. We reduced that maximum output of solar to 448, which, is at 455. At the end of the day, across the peak hour, we forecasted 281 megawatts, and the actual was 110.
So if my math is correct,
what we did forecast was what happened in between, with these 150 megawatt drops and spikes.
But you prepared and you forecast a likely drop off around the peak hour of about 180 megawatts in solar production for that day, if my math is correct based on what you said.
From 448 to 281.
Around 167 or so. I'm not very good at math, but that's pretty close. Okay.
Yeah. And we probably didn't forecast it all in 1 hour. If I had to guess, and I do know. No, I don't have that number, but we probably had somewhat of a ramp down. I don't think it would have dropped that much in 1 hour in our forecast.
Okay. If you were forecasting a maximum 500 megawatts of solar production, would you carry 600 megawatts of operating reserve for that day?
If there's 500 megawatts of solar, that means we would have 200 megawatts of it being non-firm, which is a portion that we would cover. Mm-hmm. 300 of solar would be contribution to our reserve calculation. So we would probably be up around 700 megawatts reserve.
All right. You base the amount of operating reserves you carry for solar on the amount of solar production you're actually anticipating for that day, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And just to clarify, you've got numbers.
Let me add on to that. We do that so that so any of that solar that and let's call that 40% that we put aside is non-firm. We do that just like we would treat a non-firm purchase. We back that separately. And that's why that 40% is kind of solar's backing solar then. And we're trying not to get into our firm generating reserves.
Understood. You mentioned another number in your testimony, or actually when you were responding to questions from the commission, about that you did have numbers related to available reserve on each day. Is that right? And you have available reserve by hour?
By hour?
Or you mentioned a number that you had numbers for available reserves.
That's the number. That available reserves. That is what is available. That's what's on the system operator screen.
Gotcha.
That's an instantaneous number.
Okay. I have no further questions at this time, Mr. Chairman, but I would like to request leave of the commission since, as I understand it, we're likely all to be back here after a report by a third party in a few months. We'd like the ability to send some additional discovery or data requests to Dominion related to this testimony from Mr. Hanslett.
Granted.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hanslett. Attorney Willoughby, any redirect?
No redirect, and we would ask that Mr. Hanslett be excused.
Mr. Hanslett, you are excused.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Please call your next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Green will call our next witness.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commission. We would call Mr. James Neely to the stand.
All right, Mr. Neely, please take the stand. Please pause to be sworn in by the court reporter.
If you'll raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Neely, state your name for the record, please.
James Neely.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
Employed by Dominion Energy Services as an energy market consultant.
Okay. In connection with this proceeding, Mr. Neely, did you prepare and cause to be filed direct testimony consisting of 20 pages?
Yes, sir.
Are there any corrections or changes to be made to that pre-filed direct testimony?
No, sir.
Mr. Neely, if I asked you the questions that appear in your pre-filed testimony, will your answers today from the stand be the same?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I would move the pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Neely into the record as if given orally from the stand.
The pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Neely will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Neely, attached to your pre-filed direct testimony, I believe, is one exhibit. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Are there any corrections or changes to be made to the exhibit?
No, sir.
Mr. Chairman, we would move as the next hearing exhibit, I believe, hearing exhibit number 2, the one exhibit attached to Mr. Neely's pre-filed direct testimony.
Neely Exhibit 1 will be marked and entered into the record as hearing Exhibit 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Neely, have you prepared a summary of your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Please deliver that at this time.
Good morning, Chairman Williams and members of the commission. My name is James Neely, and I'm an energy market consultant for Dominion Energy, South Carolina. In my direct testimony, I discussed the company's avoided costs for power purchases under the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act of 1978. This includes long-run avoided costs for qualifying facilities that have production capacity up to 2 megawatts and set forth in the Standard Offer Power Purchase Agreement, and also short-run avoided costs for QFs that have power production capability or capacity less than or equal to 100 kilowatts, set forth in rate PR1. The company proposes to continue calculating project-specific avoided costs using the avoided cost methodology and rate PR form PPA for systems above 2 megawatts and up to 80 megawatts. PURPA and its implementing regulations require the company to purchase electric energy from QFs at the utility's avoided cost. Avoided costs under PURPA are the energy and capacity cost the utility would have incurred but for the purchase from the QF. The company continues to use the difference in revenue requirements methodology as previously approved by the Commission to calculate both energy and capacity components of its avoided cost. The difference in revenue requirements involves calculating the revenue requirements between a base case and a change case. The difference is the avoided cost. The company uses Plexos to determine the difference between the base case cost and the change case cost for avoided energy. To determine avoided costs for both the standard offer and PR1, the base case is subtracted by a 100 megawatt power purchase profile. Avoided costs are then calculated for the appropriate period. In addition to the size differences between the standard offer and the rate PR1, the time periods are also different. The rate PR1 avoided costs are calculated for a 1-year period, whereas the standard offer rate is a 10-year calculation. The company will negotiate PPAs with any QF greater than 2 megawatts using a methodology consistent with what I've described above. Finally, certain solar power purchase agreements, or PPAs, allow the opportunity to recover variable integration costs. The company is proposing to apply the VIC proposed by company witness Peter David in this proceeding. In sum, the company requests that the Commission approve the calculation of the proposed standard offer avoided costs, PR1 avoided costs, and the company's continued use of the avoided cost difference in revenue requirements methodology to be used for future updates to the avoided costs for small power producers. The company further requests that the Commission approve the use of the VIC in new PPAs in the amounts calculated and presented by company witness Peter David. This concludes the summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neely. Did you also prepare in this case rebuttal testimony consisting of 25 pages?
Yes, I did.
Are there any corrections or changes to be made to this rebuttal testimony?
No, sir.
If I asked you the questions that appear in your rebuttal testimony, would your answers today from the stand be the same?
It would.
Mr. Chairman, I would move into the record as if given orally from the stand the pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Mr. Neely.
The pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Mr. Neely will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Neely, have you prepared a summary of your rebuttal testimony?
I have.
Please deliver that at this time.
In my rebuttal testimony, I respond to certain portions of Brian Ory's testimony, which was submitted on behalf of the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff, and to that of Kenneth Searcy, which was submitted on behalf of the South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. ORS witness Ory asserts that the company should use 66 megawatts as opposed to the 100 megawatts as assumed capacity change used to calculate avoided capacity. Using 100 megawatt is consistent with the calculation of avoided energy cost, and purpose specifically provides that a utility may use a capacity change up to 100 megawatts. I do agree with witness Ory's recommendation that the company should use 2022 as the base year for the avoided capacity calculation. Company witness Rooks will sponsor updated tariffs to reflect updates to the company's proposal. Witness Searcy contends that the gas prices used by the company are too low and recommends using the prices from the U.S. Energy Information Administration Annual Energy Outlook. However, NYMEX gas prices are based on current factors and provides a more reasonable projection. Other contentions made by witness Searcy challenging certain aspects of my direct testimony lack analytical support. He argues that the company's avoided energy rates do not accurately reflect the company's expected avoided energy costs, but offers no evidence to support his accusation. He argues that the company did not employ industry standard information and best practices in calculating the effective load carrying capacity, or ELCC. He asserts that the avoided capacity cost calculation uses unreasonably low input assumptions. This is not correct. He also asserts that the solar QF rate ELCC application and technology neutral rate allocation of capacity value are likely undermining accurate reflection of utility avoided cost in rates, but provides no evidence to support his claim. In sum, witness Searcy's unsupported claims provide no basis for rejecting the company's avoided cost calculations, and I respectfully request that the Commission approve the company's proposed avoided cost. This concludes the summary of my rebuttal testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neely. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Neely is available for questions from the parties and the Commission.
Johnson Development Associates.
Mr. Chairman, Court Walsh for Johnson Development. We don't have any questions for this witness.
Carolina's Clean Energy Business Association.
No questions for this witness at this time from CCBA.
Pine Gate Renewables, LLC.
No questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is Kate Mixon for States and CCL, and we do have some questions for Mr. Neely.
Please proceed, ma'am.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Neely. I'll warn you, I think we have quite a bit to cover today, so I'll jump right into it. I want to start with Dominion's natural gas forecast and its avoided energy calculations. First, you'd agree that the natural gas forecast is a significant input affecting the company's avoided energy costs, wouldn't you?
Well, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I do believe that it's one of the more important inputs. In fact, we spent quite a good bit of effort determining which forecast we would use, and we actually considered 3 different gas price forecasts. We considered the annual energy outlook forecast that witness Searcy has recommended. We considered a forecast by IHS that we purchased. We considered using the NYMEX prices, and we found that the NYMEX prices was the most useful, the most accurate, and so we settled on the NYMEX prices, primarily because the annual energy outlook price forecast is an annual forecast. It provides one price every year, and that's just not enough resolution for avoided cost calculations. The other thing about the annual energy outlook gas price forecast is it's only updated once a year, so it becomes stale very quickly. The IHS forecast is better. It provides monthly forecasts of prices, and it's updated every quarter. NYMEX is updated every day, and it actually has a monthly forecast, and it's actually prices that we can buy gas for. In fact, we do. As a system, we buy gas from at the NYMEX price on a daily basis. And so that's the only gas price forecast that you can actually purchase gas for. And so we settled on the NYMEX gas price because Act 62 is very clear that the avoided cost calculations must be accurate. And so the inputs have to be accurate. And so the NYMEX gas price forecast that we use was carefully considered, and it provides the accurate inputs that we need to accurately calculate avoided costs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Neely. That well, we'll be getting a little bit more into some of that in a second. So I take it you agree that natural gas costs, like they're significant costs the company could avoid by purchasing energy from QF. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not sure that we could avoid gas purchases by purchasing QF. The QF would avoid energy from a lot of different sources, but it is an important input into the model. So we are very concerned and very careful about selecting NYMEX gas prices for our forecast.
Thank you, Mr. Neely. And so all of the information and all those rationales that you just provided, your direct testimony didn't include any of that information. Is that correct?
My testimony included what we used for the forecast, I believe, but I didn't get into all the details as to why we chose what we did. But I think those are important things for the commission to understand.
Mr. Neely, my recollection is that your direct testimony didn't include any information about which natural gas forecast that the company used. Is that your understanding?
I think we communicated to all the interveners what gas price. In fact, we provided the gas price forecast to all the interveners, so they had the actual prices that we modeled.
Mr. Neely, with your respect, I'm asking whether that was included in your testimony or in the company's application.
The gas prices, were they included in my testimony or the application? Is that your question?
Yes, we'll start there. Were the prices included in your testimony or in the company's application?
No.
Was the company's methodology or rationale for selecting the forecast that it used included in either in any of the Dominion's testimony or in its application?
The method for selecting gas prices, I don't believe we included that method in my testimony.
And so is it correct that you only addressed the company's natural gas forecast in your rebuttal testimony, and that was because it was raised by CCL witness Cersei, right?
I did address it there because he raised the issue. The forecast was provided with all the other data, so all of the interveners had our gas price forecast that we used. In fact, they had all the generation that was output from the model. So it's obviously you could obviously determine from that what units were burning gas, and you could see that.
Yes. Sorry, Mr. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Are you finished?
Yes.
Okay. But again, that was only provided in discovery, correct?
That's right. That's where all of the data was provided. It was in discovery.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Neely. So to calculate avoided energy costs, the company uses a short-term and a long-term period. Is that correct?
That's right.
And the short-term avoided energy costs are calculated for May 2021 through April 2022, with a long-term cost calculated from 2022 to 2031.
That's right.
Is that right? Okay.
That is correct.
And so the company's standard offer rate here, that is essentially a 10-year contract, right?
Well, there's no contracts. It's available to be contracted for, but it doesn't necessarily create a contract. It creates the inputs for a contract to be signed.
Okay, so to be clear, if a QF were to take under one of the company's standard offer rates, those rates would apply for a period of 10 years. Is that correct?
That's right. 2 megawatt QFs and below can get the standard offer prices.
So then I guess, is it correct to say that the company uses a forecast for natural gas prices in order to try and account for what those prices might be 10 years down the road?
The forecast is as a part of the model for the whole 10 years, yes.
Okay. And again, it's important that forecast be reliable because that affects the avoided energy rates that the company will pay to QFs over that 10-year period, right?
It's important to us that every input is reliable and has a good justification, and that provides the accurate avoided cost that we calculate and have calculated.
All other things held equal, a lower natural gas forecast would result in lower avoided costs, right?
In general, that's true. You would have to run the model to see the results, but in general, you would expect that there would be any reduction in the fuel costs would result in lower avoided costs on the energy side.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Neely. So I know you went over this a moment ago, but just to make sure it's very clear. So for its natural gas forecast, the company used NYMEX futures prices to calculate its long-term avoided energy rates, right?
That's right.
And it then applied an escalation rate of roughly 3.96%, and that was derived from the EIA Annual Energy Outlook reference case, correct?
That's right. We used 3 years of NYMEX, and then we began to escalate at a particular rate. The rate that we used did come from the Annual Energy Outlook, but it's consistent with the IHS forecast, and I believe it'd be consistent with other forecasts.
Thank you. Mr. Neely, do you mind, instead of me trying to say like EIA, AEO a bunch of times, is it okay with you if I just refer to that as the EIA reference case?
That'd be fine.
Great. I don't think I'd make it through.
Yeah, I don't think I would either.
So Mr. Searcy, he critiqued Dominion's approach and instead recommended using an approach where NYMEX futures prices are blended with the EIA reference case. Is that your recollection?
He recommended using NYMEX for the first year and then moving into the Annual Energy Outlook reference case.
And your rebuttal, you claim that directly using any of the 3 EIA gas forecasts to calculate avoided costs would be inappropriate, and you say that would be less accurate than the NYMEX prices. Is that right? That's
right. The NYMEX prices more accurately reflect what actual gas prices are. And so that's important to accurately calculating avoided costs. And so that's why we use the NYMEX prices.
Okay. And so I guess one of the reasons you cite is that those EIA projections, they're only determined once a year. And so there could be differences in the prices by the time Dominion filed its avoided cost application. Is that right?
That's right. The Annual Energy Outlook is typically produced in February. And so we were doing the calculations in May. So that's 3 months, 4 months down the road, and things do change. And they've changed they change.
Okay. But the NYMEX futures data that Dominion used, that's also just a snapshot in time, right?
That's right, but that's taken at the time when we're doing the calculation, and it is a snapshot in time, but that's the best forecast at that point in the time. There has to be some input into the model, and so using the current prices is the most accurate way to calculate avoided costs.
Okay, but for instance, if Dominion were to pull that data now, it might look different than it did a few months ago when Dominion made its calculations. Is that right?
That's right. And that's exactly why the Annual Energy Outlook is the wrong forecast to use, because gas prices do change. And so it quickly is invalidated because time passes and the prices change. And so even though if I did it today, I would pull a different set of prices. I would use the current prices. But there again, the Annual Energy Outlook prices would not have changed. My tongue is getting twisted with the thing too. So maybe we even shorten it even more.
But again, like, so if Dominion were to pull NYMEX prices a few months from now, they would also be different, right?
They would be different, but they would be current, and that would be the best forecast of what gas prices are and will be.
So isn't it true though, Mr. Neely, that when Dominion pulled the NYMEX prices a few months ago, that those are different than what the NYMEX prices would look like at the time that these avoided cost rates would go into effect if they were approved?
That's true, but the most of the change to the NYMEX prices happens in the current year, and so there's less changes in the future years. But still, that's still the most accurate projection of gas prices going out for the next 3 years.
Okay. NYMEX data, it isn't it true that reflects whatever short-term variances or anomalies might be affecting natural gas prices, like at the time of that snapshot?
Well, that's true, but so is the annual energy outlook forecast. It's reflective of whatever's going on when they produce their forecast, which doesn't get updated but once a year, and it's only annual prices. Annual prices is not an effective set of prices to use for calculating avoided costs.
Well, I'll get to that in just a second, but because Dominion's approach uses that short-term data and then forecasts it outward, wouldn't you agree that any short-term pricing anomalies that were in that set of data would then be reflected in the company's long-term natural gas forecast?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. And that could also affect the accuracy of Dominion's rates going out over that 10-year period, right?
The accuracy is I wouldn't say the accuracy, but I would say the values of those prices are reflected by what's going on in the short-term market. But those things that are going on in the short-term market produce the best view of what's happening in the future. And so those prices that we use, that we pull, are the most accurate, most effective set of prices to use for avoided costs.
Okay. You also claim that Mr. Searcy's recommended blended forecast, which again uses that NYMEX data in the first year, and then EIA thereafter, that it would suffer from deficiencies after the first year and in the long term. So you agree though that his recommended approach would be accurate in that first year?
Well, if you use the same prices in the first year that we did, then his first year prices would be the same as ours. And so his first year would be accurate. But still, anytime after that he moves to the annual energy outlook that only has annual prices, he's going to suffer from a price that doesn't change month to month and that we need for our accurate calculation of avoided costs.
Mr. Neely, the company is not recalculating its avoided costs on a month-to-month basis using the NYMEX data, is it?
We do not. We calculate it once every 2 years.
Okay, thank you. And you would agree, wouldn't you, that the EIA reference case prices, they are intended to reflect longer-term pricing trends, right?
Well, they do a 30-year forecast. I believe it's 30 years, and but they update it once a year, and so their prices actually are stale after a few months, and they get further and further from being accurate the longer you wait. We got another 2 years before we calculate the avoided energy cost again, and so they'll get further and further from reality the longer you wait, and they still suffer from the problem of not being monthly prices.
But again, the EIA reference, well, all of the EIA forecasts, they are intended to, they attempt to incorporate long-term pricing trends, right?
Well, that's why they have 3 forecasts. They have a high, a mid, and a low that have different assumptions about what's going to happen in the gas market. Their low price forecast assumes there's going to be plenty of gas available. Their high gas price forecast assumes that the gas market's going to be constrained, and then they put their reference case somewhere in the middle. So they don't really know what the environment's going to be, and so they can produce three forecasts: a high, a mid, and a low, based on different assumptions about how the market's going to work out.
Okay, but Mr. Neely, I mean, the NYMEX prices, they make no attempt at reflecting long-term pricing trends, right? They are just the prices at a particular period of time when they are pulled, right?
At the time that they're pulled, you can get 10 years worth of NYMEX prices. So they do gas prices. Gas does trade on the futures market out 10 years. And so I could buy gas today to be delivered 10 years from now at that price that they're projecting today.
Okay. Mr. Neely, so you say that Dominion's projections, that they compare favorably to the 2021 EIA reference case. And so if you'll just give me 1 second, I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. Okay. Mr. Neely, are you able to see the chart that I've pulled up?
Yes, that's a very nice looking chart.
And then this is chart 1 that's on page 7 of your rebuttal testimony, right?
That is.
Right. So this chart, it does show Dominion's projection as being lower than the EIA reference case for every year of the 10-year forecast in this proceeding, doesn't it?
It does.
And by year 10, wouldn't you agree that it appears to be more in line with the 2021 EIA low forecast?
I do. And the low forecast actually is more consistent with the recent history. You look at the actual prices there and you'll see how they continue to drop. And so you can make a really strong case for actually using the AEO low gas price forecast. But there again, all of the annual energy outlook gas price forecasts suffer from not having a monthly forecast.
Okay. Mr. Neely, you testified in Dominion's 2020 IRP document, right?
Yes, I did.
And you were responsible for the natural gas forecast that Dominion used to prepare its IRP. Is that correct?
That's right.
In Dominion's initial 2020 IRP, the company used, or the company's natural gas forecast used short-term NYMEX data forecasted out using an escalation rate based on AEO data. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen again here. Hopefully this works. Okay. Mr. Neely, do you recognize this as Commission Order 2020-832 from the 2020 IRP proceeding?
That's what the heading says, yes.
Right. And yes, this is page 68 of that order. Do you recall that Mr. Searcy also testified in that proceeding?
I do.
Okay. And are you able to read a text that's highlighted?
Yes.
Is it big enough? Okay, great. Could you please read that portion of the order?
Such an approach has the result that transient short-term market dynamics, such as gas storage inventories and recent weather patterns, become reflected in long-term prices. AEO forecasts, by contrast, represent complex long-term market interactions to project prices. Changing long-term market dynamics are captured as various data and structural shifts are incorporated into the AEO as a part of its annual release schedule. I think we lost you, Ms. Mixon.
I think we did, Mr. Neely. Just hold tight.
Please bear with us as we try to make contact with Attorney Mixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This is Emma Clancy with CCL and SACE. I'm just talking to Miss Mixon, and she's signing off and going to try signing back in. So just.
Thank you for the update. All right. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to take our lunch break, our afternoon recess. Our live stream producers need to get in contact with Attorney Mixon to work out some kinks. We're in recess until 1:30.